I'm Sarah Knight, and welcome to It's Got Pockets, where just like finding the surprise pockets in your favourite trousers, I'm bringing you perfect pockets of joy and realness. Every week, I'm having unfiltered conversations with women who crack the feck on, even when life gets proper lifey. Women with experience, expertise, and wisdom. Because sometimes the best stories start in the middle. Women who've been there, done that, and they're still figuring it out. Join me for real talk, useful tactics, and all the swears in between that make your life and business feel that bit more manageable. Hello, welcome to It's Got Pockets. Now then, I have a little bit of a confession today because It's Got Pockets has always been and will always be about women, by women, inspiring women. Except today it's not. Today, I'm letting a man on the show.
Oh my goodness.
So I'm letting a boy in, a man in. So I am welcoming it into the conversation, the fabulous Andrew Bernard, otherwise known as Bernie. And myself and Bernie met a couple of months ago now. We're working together on a business program with a client, looking at all about women in business and what inclusive leadership is. And as part of our conversations, we started to talk about what you do in a wider remit, really, beyond your motivational speaking, beyond what you do in workplaces and organizations. And it really piqued my interest from a point of view of the development programs that you do in schools, in businesses with people about what makes a man.
Yeah.
I was really conscious that what we do as women, we can be sitting in an echo chamber and we can be talking about misogyny all the time and we can talk about what happens, but actually we need to include the men in our conversations. And I've had a couple of conversations of recent times, and I've spoken to you about it, about how maybe the men in our lives react and what we can do about it, how we can bring up our sons, how the conversations that we need to have. So welcome to It's Got Pockets.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be a groundbreaker for once. Yeah, it's nice to be on. Thank you. Yeah, we talked about allyship, we talked about all the other stuff, and I think with you talking about your experiences of misogyny and the experiences that, let's face it, every woman must face at some point in her lives, from commuting to work, to being in the office, to being talked over, to being hushed, to being seen as less than in the workplace. It starts with us. Because I talk about male violence a lot, and one of the phrases I use a lot is that male violence against women and girls is a men's issue that manifests as a woman's problem. And I think inequality, misogyny, that kind of overtaking people in meetings, that's a men's issue that becomes a woman's problem. That kind of holding the room and, just kind of shushing everyone else or just talking over or like I'm doing now. Talk but I think that's on us to kind of think, okay, let's not be defensive here. Let's maybe think someone else might have some ideas. She might be able to bring something to the table that I have no idea about, that I've never thought about, that might really improve not only the way we communicate with each other, but the way the organization works.
Yeah. So tell us what brought you into this world, because I think it's quite an unusual. I mean, there's a trigger warning with your story because we're talking about coercive control and we're talking about domestic violence. But I'm really intrigued because it does become a them and us, and I think until we make it an us, then we're not going to go anywhere. But tell us first about what brought you into the world of equality.
Okay. I thought you meant what brought me into the world, and I thought, well, you should probably know that by now.
Well, I have learnt about that in various books, and I do have 2 children, so something happened somewhere.
Well, I mean, a couple of things that has led me to working in schools on PSHE, particularly in terms that's personal social health and economic education, and one of those was my own behaviour as a young man, and I was brought up I was the adopted son of a police officer, and my mum worked in Stoke Mandeville Hospital as a volunteer. She also had a part-time job, and me and my sister were both adopted from Guernsey at different times. And I had no reason to rebel against anything, to be perfectly honest. My mum was like Hyacinth Bouquet, very kind of middle class and aspirational, and we basically moved so that I could get into the catchment area to apply for the grammar school. Got into the grammar school, hated every moment of it. Boys' grammar school. But at sixth form, I did okay. I got kind of 8 GCSEs, O levels as they were, absolutely average, B's and C's. And then my mates all went to the local college. And my parents said, no, we think it'd be best if you stay there. And all I'm thinking of when I'm telling them how good the college is, that it's great facilities. You can do A levels, you can do music tech, you can do all these other amazing things. All I'm thinking is that my mates will be there. I can wear my own clothes and there'll be girls there. They're the only three things I cared about. And my parents said no. So that kind of led to me just kicking off for 2 years. So I got into football, started going to Arsenal games, started where you need to wear the right clothes in the middle of the 80s to go to football games. So I started nicking clothes because I couldn't afford Paul Smith stuff and Burberry jackets and things. So I got arrested with 5 mates for trying to nick £1,000 worth of clothes on Oxford Street. Arrested. Talk about hubris. We thought, oh yeah, we'd do all right here. We're amazing at this. We've got about 500 quid's worth, and then all of a sudden, hubris catches us up. On Europe's busiest shoplifting and pickpocketing street, there's going to be coppers everywhere, and there were. So that didn't go down well with my parents. Also, I started to get into fighting as well because that was a key part of obviously 80s football. And then because we were going to London and getting into kind of broad skirmishes, not kind of right in the heart of it, we were coming back and telling our stories about how hard we'd been. And of course, everyone wanted to fight us. And the way dominance-based masculinity works is if someone offers you a fight, you have to take it. You can't back down because then you lose your status. And it's all about dominance. It starts kind of being, best clothes and nicest looking girlfriends or most girlfriends or however you're going to measure it as a kind of teenage boy. But I never backed down. So I also got arrested for smashing up a pub I was arrested with a pool cue in my hand, smashing up a pub. And I was so deeply into it that I couldn't kind of see what was happening. At 17.
A lot of kids can do that, can they? Do
Yeah.
you know, at 17, how can you, when you're surrounded by that level of peer pressure and you're surrounded by, you described it as the 4S, swearing is absolutely and appreciated.
Fashion and girlfriends.
Yeah.
And I say that when I do that in schools and I go, the teachers are kind of going, oh my, what's he going to say? So yeah, but that was without the internet. That was without everything wrapping around young people like young people have got now. Social media telling them they have to be like this and they have to be like that. And I found out at 17 I was adopted as well in an argument with my mum. So you can imagine how that fueled my aggression, my machismo, my just vile behaviour. Do you know what woke me up? Getting an E and a U at A level. I was the lowest scoring student at the grammar school that year. I only ended up doing 2 A levels because I told my English teacher to fuck off, and he made me. Basically kicked me off the course. Why I did English literature, I never know. I'd only read one book up until that point, and that was 1984 for my GCSE for my O level. So why did I take English literature where you have to read big books and understand? I had no idea what I was doing, but I basically spent 2 years angry, knackered up my A levels, cried my eyes out for about an hour, and then thought, right, I need to get out of Aylesbury. I grew up in Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, one of those small towns where everyone knows everybody and everyone wants to fight everybody, and I never backed down. So that was my kind of first introduction to what I'm talking about. And then straight after college, did okay. I ended up going to North Wales Institute of Higher Education, which no one's ever heard of because they would offer me a place on a course with an E and a U at A level. So, and no one ever goes there because they want to. And so it was just, but it was amazing for me. I came out with a distinction grade HND in business and finance, which I never would have got if I'd have stayed in Aylesbury. I would have been a roofer and kind of ended up fighting at weekends and gone to prison or something, or got really seriously injured. So, and then straight after that, I got testicular cancer. So if you want your masculinity challenged, have one of your bollocks taken away. Seriously. And I'd left it for ages, hadn't gone to the doctors. And one day I came home, I was living at my dad's. My parents had split up by then. And my girlfriend, Ali, at the time, was leaning against the wall and she said, we need to talk. I said, why? What's going on? And she went, who are you seeing? I said, what are you on about? She went, well, you've not been near me in 6 weeks. So I went, oh, okay. Yeah. I've got a bit of pain down there. So I showed her, and 15 minutes later, I'm at the doctor's. The next morning, my right testicle's been removed. So,
and that as well is that whole female male equation, isn't it? Is the fact that, it was
responsibility for my health and, kicked me to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. That kind of, I'll be all right. I'll have a couple of pints and I'll sleep all right. I'll have a couple of aspirin and then I'll be fine. That ridiculous notion that, we shouldn't be shown to be too weak or vulnerable and all these kind of things that they take a long time to go. And none of us ever choose these elements of masculinity. We just absorb what's around us. And then, this dominance-based idea, it continues into adulthood as well, doesn't it? With private number plates and golf club memberships and, gold, platinum cards and all this kind of stuff. That's nothing to do with us. That's to do with us going, look, I've got a Hugo Boss suit, and leaving the bloody label on like a child. It doesn't get, it's really hard to get rid of. So my mission is to kind of let young people, tell them my story and I get them laughing. And then I tell them about losing my testicle. And then I say, I didn't choose any of that behavior. And without the internet and without the kind of wraparound stuff that you've got, I mean, 20 years ago, we were talking about skincare and man bags and, metrosexual males. And now we've been kind of dragged back into the traditional old school masculinity, stereotype roles. Women should serve, men should work, which not only is it regressive and sexist and misogynistic and taking it, or your grandmother didn't want to work. Well, she couldn't even have a bank account, let alone do anything else. She had to stick with that violent, aggressive, assertive masculinity that made sure she popped out children at her time. She didn't have a choice.
Yeah. When did you realise you had a choice? And you said that it was when you had your A levels and you tried at that. But did you realise then?
Yes. That hour-long session in my bedroom, crying my eyes out, having the first piece of genuine emotion I'd had for about 7 years, I actually thought, I need to do something about this. And it was like the hardest punch in the face I'd ever had, but it was from a piece of paper. And it was kind of, you've done this to yourself. You fucked it up, basically. And that was the kind of me going, oh yeah, my parents hate me. Loads of my teachers hate me. My head teacher hated me. I couldn't go out of house without getting into a fight because there was always someone that I'd either beaten up or had wanted to beat me up, or, me and my group of mates. We used to knock around in a white Mini. 9 of us would get in a Mini, 3 on the back seat, 3 in their laps, 2 in the front seat, and my mate Steve driving. And we'd go to kind of parties in villages because it was all tiny village, kind of like village hall parties. And we'd end up in fights, and we'd end up nicking people's nice jackets, and we'd end up kind of hoovering up booze and drinking bottles of cider and having fights and, all that stuff. One of the things that kind of held me together was dancing. I loved music and I loved dancing. 80s funk and soul is still right at the heart of my musical journey. We used to go to these amazing discos, and me and my mate Joe would be the ones that were dancing, and we would be the ones at the end of the night who would end up with a girl. All my other mates who were standing around the outside like that, hoovering up people's drinks and staring at people, they ended up getting into fights. So there were good and bad bits about, my behavior, but it was that realization was, I've done this to myself. I need to change it. And I suppose if I'm trying to teach young people anything, it's you have a choice all the way along. And the moment you realize that you've got a choice is one of the most powerful days of your life.
And how do you then have those conversations when, I bring girls and boys into this because peer pressure is hideous, especially when you're growing up, and actually as an adult, peer pressure for me, I really struggled with peer pressure as an adult. And actually my group of friends that I grew up with, I'm not friends with them anymore, probably because I started going, oh, actually, this is who I am. And it didn't work for everyone involved. And so peer pressure is really hard. And then you've got peer pressure laid on top with bloody Andrew Tate and all the other stuff that I want to talk to you about. But so how do you talk to kids in a relevant way? Because no disrespect, but you're as old as the hills like me. So you're standing in there and it's like, you can talk about your story, but how do you make it relevant to the kids in the room?
After I talk about what I've done and, having testicular cancer, I then talk about, they need to take responsibility, not only for their choices, but also for their health, because I nearly fell foul of both of those things. And then I'll show them some kind of screenshots and things from the internet that kind of prove how ridiculous some of the notions are that they're being fed. Things like kids' t-shirt patterns, for example. We don't choose to be stereotyped. We don't choose to have toys for girls that are nurturing and caring. We don't choose to be brought up as boys who are not allowed to show emotions and stuff, but that's, get up, come on, don't run like a girl, or come on, don't cry, come on, be a man about it. And you kind of just absorb this stuff. So what if you're a boy that quite likes playing kitchens or quite likes playing cafes? It's kind of drummed out of you if you've got a doll. What's the danger of teaching a boy to be empathetic? He might grow up to be a good father. So we're worried about this stuff, and there's this kind of nonsensical notion that if you teach a boy to be caring about children, he's going to be gay. That's the number of times I've heard that kind of message. It's bonkers. It doesn't make any sense at all. So what I'll do is I'll talk about, I've got a load of T-shirts that I show them. So one of them says, "Here comes trouble," and one of them says, so who's that for? Obviously, it's for a boy, and it's a dark green T-shirt with blue writing on it. And the next one I show is a rainbow, and it says, "Always be kind." So I say, what's the most sinister word on there? Always. Because women and girls are groomed to nice their way out of things. You're groomed to be polite. You're, manipulated to be caring and at all times. And I think that's where it starts. And when I start to point this stuff out, and these are just T-shirts, or I look at boys' T-shirts, and they have things like T-Rex on, they have things like sharks on. You look at girls' T-shirts, and they have things like bunny rabbits and horses and unicorns. So one's predators and one's prey. And it blows their mind a bit to see this stuff. And all this, live, laugh, dance, and all this kind of stuff. And oh yeah, all of that stuff. And I try and say, you've got a choice about this. It's really easy to fall into these boxes, but you have a right not to fall into those boxes. You have a right to say, actually, if I don't have friends, if I lose friends because I'm going to say, well, I'd rather not play football, I'd rather not play FIFA online, I'd rather, I don't know, learn the guitar or learn the piano, or I don't know, paint my nails, or whatever it is that's completely out of the scope of what is allowed by the man box, then if I lose friends about that, then maybe they were my friends anyway.
And one of the interesting things here is that I feel that there's more permission granted, because it is about the permission we take ourselves and the permission that's granted to do that. Like when my daughter was born, she's 23 now.
Yeah.
She hated dresses from an early age. Couldn't stand it, to the point where when she was a bridesmaid for one of my friends, the only way I got her down the aisle, and she was about 2.5 at the time, was I had to put a pair of jeans underneath the bridesmaid's dress. And then I was like, just walk down like that. And she literally just picked up this hideous skirt that she didn't want to wear and showed the world. And the woman who was the bride was a bridezilla and was not happy about it at all. And she wouldn't wear pink or anything like that. And she dressed up until the age of probably about 12. She dressed purely in the boys' department of H&M. It used to fry my brain, because it was like, I'm not a pink girl. I do not want to dress her in pink. It was like, I couldn't stand the stereotype back then. But equally, I live in a house with like a 19-year-old boy and a 23-year-old girl. Yeah. And there is lots of banter that goes on in this house that is still very sexist and still very stereotypical. So we've got a generation coming through who understand more, that even though they're served more, I think there's potentially more understanding there. But what happens when they go back home to dad?
I don't know.
And dad says, the kid goes home and so the kid goes home and says, do you know what? I actually my husband's a guitarist, so I can't say like I just want to play guitar instead of football. But yeah, I just want to play guitar instead of football. And dad's like, he's a diehard Man U fan, and he's like, oh, what the fuck are you playing guitar for? What happened? Because that's the difficult one as well, then, isn't it? Because they've got to educate dads as well as
and parents generally. But I think you're right that dads have this idea that they kind of live through their kids. And kind of, I didn't do it because I had that knee injury when I was 14. I could have been somebody, but I'm gonna get Ryan. Ryan's gonna do it for us. Other teams are available though. I wouldn't put them in Man United. Anyway, let's not go down there. Yeah, I mean, there's always been generational pressures, hasn't there? And I think we're probably at the cusp of the point where we're starting to question things. us kind of 50 plus type people. I think we are there, or we're entrenched in the old style. And I guess it depends where you grew up, what your parents were like, what your relationships with your parents and your kids are like, and whether you challenge those stereotypes. There's going to be class elements. There's also going to be race elements in there as well. But I think what's been happening certainly in the last 10 years, is this massive division that's been kind of created between traditional masculinity and traditional families and everyone else who's woke and weird and shouldn't be doing things that are out of the natural order of things. And that kind of leads to this idea that men are naturally full of testosterone, so they are going to be more violent, so excusing violence in all forms. And also, we don't want kind of low testosterone. I get called a low T male quite a lot of the time, low testosterone male, because I talk about equality, because I talk about women's rights, because I talk about male violence against women and girls, as a kind of defender of women and girls against male violence. I get called low T, low testosterone. And when I say, I'll quite often come back and say, well, seeing as I had testicular cancer and I've only got one, that means mine works twice as hard as yours. So I'm not sure I'm low T actually, mate, because I've got a couple of kids. No problem with that. So, that's the kind of online echo chambers that I inhabit. And they're either very, very supportive spaces, or they're very, very much draws the kind of worst of kind of masculinity and men, calling me a cuck and a simp and all of these kind of words that basically, suggest that I'm weak and that I've been overpowered and brainwashed by feminism. I spend a lot of time talking about feminism.
And talk to me about feminism. What does feminism mean to you?
It means simply equality. I'm wearing a t-shirt from the Spark company. They have an amazing range of t-shirts. I love this one. Feminism for me, I go back to the original aims of feminism: equality in politics, economics, society. That's a really simple measure. Not kill all men, which is what the online space says about it. Well, if you want to talk about people who hate the other gender, let's talk about misogyny, shall we? Let's talk about the way that's been monetized, weaponized, and absolutely manipulates young men. So let's talk about that. But I go back to that, and then you say, quite often I'll work with young people and I'll say, in fact, this came up really in a really kind of weird way last year. I ended up going back to a school in Stratford-on-Avon, a very, very long established, very nice school. And I started talking, and this kid went, "Oh, we did this with you last year, sir." And the teacher had kind of somehow kind of mixed the year groups up, and I was doing the same session. I said, well, I wondered what I could do. And I just wrote on the board, "Has feminism gone too far?" That's all I wrote. And loads of kids go, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I said, right, okay, put your hands up if you think feminism's gone too far. I'm not judging you. I'm just asking you if you think it has. So the first group out of 28 kids, the first group had 7, the second group had 13, and the third group had 14. So around half the kids. So maybe a third of the kids in the whole year group. And those that said, just keep your hands up if you said, do you think feminism? Just describe in what way. Well, it just has. How? Well, they can abort babies. Okay. But it takes 2 people to make a baby, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah. So if both of those people had thought about the issues that there was going to happen if one of them got pregnant, then aren't they? Oh, well, yeah, but women can do it without men's permission. Well, yeah. Maybe it's inconvenient. And this boy said, well, it should be means tested, and if they can afford it, they should be forced to have it. And this was a grammar school. These were clever boys.
Wow.
And one other kid said, well, you can maybe put them all in one place on an island. I said, oh, so it's like a kind of motherhood ghetto for single parents. He went, yeah. I said, and what if people said 14-year-old and 15-year-old boys should be taken away from their families and put into an island where they were allowed to leave? Would that be okay? And he went, oh. I said, you see the problem with this? And he went, yeah. So feminism, has it gone too far? Well, it depends. So I said, well, let's measure. So I'd put 3 things up, equality in politics, economics, society. politics is relatively straightforward. How do you measure? So you measure kind of political representation. That's one of the easiest ways. What do parliaments look like? Globally, there are about 5 parliaments that have parity because they've decided to have parity. Rwanda has more women. It's the only place in the world that has more women.
Wow.
But if you look at the history of Rwanda, the recent history, women had to take power because there weren't enough men left because the men had been killing each other. Now, it's more complicated than saying men who can't compromise, but war is created by men who can't compromise over a scrap of land or a flag or whatever it is. So in the UK, in 2024, it was 36% women, 66% men, 64% men. In the House of Commons and the House of...
Lords.
Say that again?
Lords.
House of Lords, right.
No lordesses.
So the Mother of Parliament was never intended to include women in its upper chamber. Or in any chamber, to be perfectly honest. Now, in 1989, it was about 3% women. So we've made big strides.
Yeah.
But by looking at it's about a 3% increase. So it's going to take 5 parliaments to close that gap, which is another 25 years. But women MPs, female MPs, get a disproportionate amount of pushback, of hatred, and kind of online harassment and hassle, and face-to-face hassle. Look at what happened to Joe Cox. I mean, that happened to David Amis as well. So sometimes MPs feel the wrath of people's fury, but why would you put yourself up for that? And also, there up until recently, there's not been any childcare facilities. So, women taking their babies to work, they're not allowed to have their babies in the chamber and this kind of stuff if they're young and they're breastfeeding. So there's loads of reasons why women wouldn't. So yeah, so that's the first one, politics. Look at economics. There's still a gender pay gap. It's a myth. Well, it's a global measure. And on the 1st of September, that was the day that women in the UK work for free. You probably saw that yesterday. So we have a gender pay gap. And even in teaching, which is 75% female, has a 24.4% gender pay gap. So the men that are in there, that are 20% of men, that 25% of men that are in there are disproportionately overpaid.
Wow.
And that's the universal service for children. So you look at across the piece. So is economics equal? So has feminism gone far enough with economics? No. And also, when women have babies, when women have children, and they come out of the workforce, when they try to go back into the workforce, childcare is so expensive that because they're already earning less, they stay off. So they lose more and more time. And Reshma Sujani said recently that a man who becomes a father earns 6% more as soon as he has a child. The woman earns 4% less per child. So the proportions grow and grow. The disproportionality grows more and more and more. And then look at society. So I'll give you 2 things in society. Adidas did a thing called the Ridiculous Run. They did a survey of people who do exercise on their website, and they did it with a sports tracking app, and they found that 92% of women are concerned when exercising outside. Feelings aren't facts. I've had that quite a lot of the time when I put that. But whether they're facts or not, women feel concerned, and they don't feel concerned about the weather or cars particularly. They'll tie their hair up. You know this. I don't need to tell you this, but women will take loads of precautions. They go out like Jason Bourne, with all these kind of extra gadgets and trackers and pepper spray and all this kind of stuff. So, the other one, which has 93% of UK households, the woman does the majority of household labour. In the 30% of households where she is the main breadwinner, so she earns more, in 45% of those households, the woman still does 7.5 hours more unpaid labour a week than her male partner. So feminism hasn't gone far enough. And in my view, men haven't changed and adapted quickly enough to the way society moves. And a lot of the pressures that families feel so that men can't be the provider and women have to go out to work is nothing to do with gender politics. It's to do with capitalism. It's to do with money. Because the moment I think capitalists realise, the owners of the forces of production realise that women were working, great. Other companies go, right, let's make childcare really expensive so they have to work. and everything else goes up and everything else becomes more expensive. And then it becomes a race to you kind of cling on to your job, or you just go, okay, I won't work because at least I'm bringing up my own child and I'm not just working to give money to someone else to bring up our kids.
Well,
And there's a lot of guilt around motherhood as well, around that. Oh, she's too lazy to work, or she's too lazy to look after her own children. I mean, which is it? And none of those decisions are very much based on what we want to do as young families, are they? They're based on what makes economic sense. And because there's already a gender pay gap, because everything's ridiculously expensive, the woman disproportionately takes more time out of work and kind of damages her career and damages her pension. There's massive, massive knock-on effects. And you'll get blokes saying, well, that's her choice. Well, it might be, but it's a choice with a gun to her head.
and going back to the whole feminism thing is that I had this conversation with my 19-year-old on holiday, actually, and he feels that feminism and he is, I would stand here now and say he's one of the most intuitive kids that I know, and he's like a massive champion of equality. But even he felt that feminism had been shoved down his throat. Now, he's mainly lived in an all-female household most of his life and been a single parent. But equally, I feel it's been weaponized. I was in a conversation recently with a group of friends and I got called out mainly because of my opinion on something I saw as misogynistic. Uh, I was seen as the one that was weaponizing feminism.
Overreacting.
Yeah. And it's really
The oppression everywhere. Playing
yeah.
the card, all that. Yeah.
And it becomes a dirty word, it becomes a thing of like, how do you describe yourself when you're standing up and speaking up for every single person around you? But yeah, I am feminist. I am, because I'm a believer in my rights. I'm a believer in being able to do what I want to do and not having to compromise on it. And yeah, it feels very weaponized these days by women and men.
Yeah, it is. I had a really interesting conversation with a group of year sevens in Leicester about a year ago, 2 years ago. And we were talking about feminism and why it's so important. And this kid on the front is a year seven, so he's like 11 or 12. And he went, oh, feminism's gone too far. And I went, has it? Why'd you say that? And he went, well, look, I believe in equality. So I said, so you are a feminist then? I said, because that's all feminism is. I wonder if we called it equalism,
Yeah.
then more men might be interested. But because it's fem.
Well, I saw a thing. It was on dreaded LinkedIn, which that's a whole different conversation about how they're suppressing women's voices on there. But it was really interesting, and I can't remember who it was now. I'll put it in the show notes. But she was talking about allyship and the way that we move forward, and she showed up two pictures, and in those two pictures, same woman. And the first picture she held up was the picture was a picture of a woman, and it said female ally. And then exactly the same picture of her, and with a picture saying male ally.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because actually the way your brain goes is that, well, she's an ally to men. And in that one, she's an ally to women, but that's not the case, is it? So, with all this weaponization of language that's going on all the bloody time.
Yeah.
How do we do it? How do we change it?
But just because you're one thing doesn't mean you're not another, does it?
Yeah.
And I think you can be both, can't you?
Yeah.
I quite often have this, that the whole, and I call it manufactured male victimhood, which really upsets people, but it comes from a thing in South Korea called male victimhood. There's a kind of whole concept of it, a whole generation of young men around 30 who are, they're being kind of apparently oppressed by the 4B movement. You heard of the 4B movement?
Oh, what's that?
It's basically South Korean women have gone, actually, we don't want this anymore. We don't want the traditional marriage. We don't want to have kids. We don't want to. And they basically, can't remember what the 4Bs are, but they basically kind of mean, I'm out of dating. I don't want to do it. I want the peace that comes from choosing my own life and having my own stuff. So that's kind of become a big, the threat of the 4B movement, and that's then been weaponized as, oh, an old cat lady, like a mad single cat lady and all that. I think a lot of people would be quite happy just to kind of live without being mithered and hassled all the time and just have a load of pets around. I think it's fine. But I think that the manufactured male victimhood is that, well, men are oppressed too. And this kind of, well, men go to war. Who sends men to war?
Men.
Generally, why do men go to war? Because other men can't compromise. And, men do horrible jobs. Well, of course they do. Because capitalists want the strongest people to do those horrible jobs, and they've always weaponized that. They've got unions to actually keep women out so that it keeps as a male-dominated field. So yeah, men do work in sewerage. Yeah, men do work in offshore oil rigs and stuff. It's not because women don't want to do those or don't want the opportunity. They've been closed out for quite a lot of the time. And also, capitalism and kind of the forces of production were back there again. Really like men doing it, because men will do risky stuff. They won't worry so much about health and safety. They'll kind of really kind of big it up about how dirty their work is and about how hard their work is. And that's something that's brilliantly covered in this book,
For the Love of Men by Liz Plank.
Liz Plank. There's a whole chapter in there about how kind of capitalism has kind of grabbed men and gone, you have to be a strong, hard, dangerous man. It comes from cowboys. It comes from all this kind of stuff, and got men hooked on hard drinking. For example, I'll give you a brilliant example. Drinking in terms of masculinity. Since the fall of the kind of Soviet Union, all those kind of smelting and iron jobs and quarrying and all those manly jobs that men used to do that have now been mechanized or kind of sold off, men drink more. And it's a really kind of solo, it's real gendered. Men go to bars. Men don't drink wine or beer because then they're called wet hens. So, they're emasculated by calling a female chicken. So they drink vodka. 25% of Russian men don't make it past 55.
Wow.
Because of the amount of alcohol, and because they drink, they get cirrhosis of the liver, they get cancers, they end up fighting each other, they end up crashing their cars and dying. 25%, because alcohol is so enmeshed with masculinity. So yeah, it has been weaponized, but a lot of the kind of, like I call it, don't get me wrong, men are suffering. Men have been taught not to speak, and men have been taught not to show weakness. Men have been taught that they have to be strong at all times, that they need to be stoic. And a lot of people think stoicism is not having emotions. No, it's managing the emotions that you have and understanding them rather than reacting to them. It's kind of reflecting and then responding to them. But so much of that, and kind of being strong and taking muscle supplements and all this kind of stuff, they're not things that anybody else other than old school notions of masculinity have forced men to do. So yeah, men die by suicide at a high rate because they're good at it. If they're going to choose to do it, they're good at it. But also because old school versions of masculinity tell them they're not allowed to be vulnerable. It's not the women around them generally that say, well, I don't want to hear about it. It's generally our inability to kind of, when I first met Val's from Manchester, I was from down south. I couldn't even access the emotions I was feeling, let alone express them. I couldn't even understand what my own emotions were. That's partly because I'm a southerner and, we don't talk about stuff down there. And, Val is a talkative northerner. Her job was a counsellor for 30 years, when she was, mainly listening to people, but also never been behind the door and kind of sharing her opinions. Whereas when we first got together, when we were in an argument, I thought if we have an argument, that's it, we're finished. But I couldn't even access the feelings I had, let alone express them. And I think that's true of so many men.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the Andrew Tate effect, because I know we've had a conversation. It's not just Andrew Tate. There's other things that we need to be aware of, like Andrew Tate's not even a problem anymore. But when you're saying you can't access the emotions, how did you learn to access your emotions? Is that through being in a trusted relationship where Val pulled it out of you gradually, or is it because...
Yeah, we got together and within a couple of years had our first daughter, and then 6 years later we had our second. And I think being a dad, being responsible for other people, being having to kind of express my emotions and talk to them, and Val and I were very clear about boundaries with the kids. So, just so we didn't have that kind of one bouncing off, say, oh, but dad says we can do this, and mum's, we would kind of organize our kind of thoughts on things ahead, and we just agreed. It was just kind of easier to kind of sort that out so that we didn't have that stuff. And there are three things that I think are really important in being a parent, and that's boundaries. What you expect from your children. Not to say you're in a box and say you're not allowed to do this, but here's what we expect you to do. If you choose not to do that, then there'll be consequences. Boundaries, care. Whatever you do, we love you, and we're doing this for your best interest. And sarcasm. If you don't take the piss out of your kids, they get a massive head and they become very, very serious about themselves. And I'll tell you what, one thing about boys, if they take themselves too serious, they end up in loads of fights.
One of the things that both my kids say to me is that they don't have the embarrassment gene because they grew up with me as the mother.
I mean, yeah, and that's about kind of shying away and hiding away and doing what you should do. Particularly as a girl, you shouldn't be too loud. You shouldn't be too gobby or whatever expressions there are. So I think that's one of the things that really helped me to kind of open up, becoming a parent and realizing that I wasn't the only person in the world, and that I had to kind of access what feelings I was having, because I was destroyed half the time with tiredness. My friend years ago said, my friend's older brother said, you learn to exist on a new level of tiredness when you have kids. So you have to be able to understand your emotions. Otherwise, you end up crying or angry or shouting and stuff. So you have to kind of understand that. And I think that learning how to care for other people and not seeing it as a job, but seeing it as a kind of pleasure, really, to kind of look after and care for somebody else. That's a massive thing for young men to understand, I think. Because, and going back to kind of where the old school masculinity is pushing us now, this kind of idea that women should do all the stuff in the house, men should just go out to work. That's so unrealistic and so unfulfilling as well.
And I do think there's bits of it that are changing. I see it. One of the things I love hearing is when the 19-year-old's on the phone to his friends, and this has gone on for years now, is they all finish the conversation with "I love you." These are lads from Salford who might have Thai boxers, but the care they have for each other,
Yeah.
and the tightness of that care, that when one of them's struggling, you can see they're all looking at it now.
A long wrap around.
Yeah, and that wraparound happens, and there really is a huge amount of care that I see that, when they will all have their macho moments, and they will all have the misogynistic moments, and they will all have their discussions and all that sort of stuff. But one of the things that I really value seeing in them is a bunch of 19-year-olds who can walk down the street and look pretty intimidating, but equally, like Freddie, he doesn't listen to this, so he won't know it, but he rang me the other day and he was trying to get somewhere he was trying to get to his dad's to watch the Man United game. And at the same time, he was trying to get his nutrition in because he's got a bloody Thai boxing match in a few weeks. And I rang him and I was like, "You all right, mate?" And he went, "Oh, I'll call you back. I'm just helping this woman." And I was like, "What do you mean you're helping this woman?" And he went, "I'll call you back, Mum. I'll call you back." Anyway, ages went past and I didn't hear from him. And I was like, "You all right?" And he went, "Yeah, I'll call you in a minute." Anyway, he was going into the shop to buy his lean chicken to have with something. And as he was coming out, there was this little old lady coming down the ramp of the local shop, and she couldn't get down, and there was another woman helping her.
Yeah.
And he said he couldn't believe it because everybody, men and women, were just walking past, leaving it. So anyway, between him and this woman, they got this. I mean, he said it was taking that long, and United were kicking off. He was going nuts, but he said he nearly flipped her over her shoulder and just ran her home. But he helped her get home and got her into a house, and he said I made her a cup of tea and I gave her a biscuit, and I gave him my phone number in case she needed anything. And then he came out and he said the woman that was with him that had been helped as well went into the shop and bought him a lottery ticket. And I'm a bit gutted because we didn't win the lottery, which is why I'm still talking to you today. But I love that he was care first, and I see that in a lot of them. But then I also see this, and I don't know why I'm calling it the Andrew Tate effect, because you're going to tell me something that we had a conversation about that I can't bloody remember. But it's not Andrew Tate, is it? It's the other stuff that we're not seeing that you're
I always,
showing.
Movember did a research report with 3,000 young men in America, Australia, and the UK, and they call them masculinity influencers. And I think that that's probably just because Tate's the tip of the misogynistic iceberg, or he's still desperately clinging to his relevance, but he is less so.
Yeah.
All of this, there's a whole kind of narrative that young men are very vulnerable to, and that is that you have to be, it's old school masculinity kind of ultimately weaponized. And I think it's on the wave, riding on the waves of things like Take Back Control, the Brexit nonsense, and also Make America White Again. Sorry, Make America Great Again, which is basically white supremacy on speed, and that has now kind of done, Mexican rapists coming across the border stealing your jobs, when actually all the jobs on that Rust Belt went from Detroit to places like China years ago, and that's what destroyed the American economy, and people nicking all the money from selling bonds. So capitalism has destroyed men's chances, and the ability to do an honest day's work and all this kind of stuff. So there's that side. There's also the kind of hyper masculinity. You have to be strong, you have to get weights, you have to kind of be prepared for anything, and all this kind of kickboxing stuff. And then there's treating women like shit. There's kind of, women are stupid, women don't understand things, they need to be led. But then, there's right at the center of it, this kind of the manufactured male victimhood that comes from all of them, from people like Jordan Peterson, from people like Tate, and loads of these other kind of blokes that shout into microphones. This kind of idea that we're strong, natural leaders, and we don't take any hassle, but we're oppressed by feminism because it's gone too far. Now, pick a side. The central conceit right at the heart of the Manosphere is nonsense. They just want to blame women for everything that goes wrong. And that at the heart of it is the kind of the genesis of manufactured male victimhood. And this kind of boys are struggling now. The what's it called? The Lost Boys. If you read loads of those reports, the tone of them is that the world order is shifting. And what they're not saying is because men should be above women. So changes around certain kind of demographics of work where women are earning more than men, it's one tiny fraction of the entire workforce in which that is happening. Things like women have had loads of success with STEM jobs, STEM careers, careers in engineering and math. It's not stopping loads of men having those jobs. It's just bringing some equality into an area. The issue is that there's not been an equivalent push to get more men into things like HEAL careers, which is health, education, administration, and kind of literature, so kind of arts and stuff. There's not been that push. So we're still relying on women to kind of do the majority of those jobs. But because women do the majority of those jobs, they're poorly paid. So men are not kind of encouraged to do that because they've also been told they've got to be the provider. So there's an inherent tension between the way boys and girls are brought up in schools and education. I wrote a book called The Ladder all about this, all about education, all about helping teachers to help young people about their careers. And there's a whole section on equality and statistics on it and things. And boys really are not particularly struggling any worse than girls are. But because that's changing in terms of league tables and the position that boys have naturally had, because they've had more kind of input into schooling than girls traditionally have, and in terms of the way that they've been kind of led towards careers that they should do as men and these careers that girls should do, that's just leveled up a little bit. And there will be cases where there are more women than men succeeding in certain careers. That doesn't mean men are over. That doesn't mean there's a crisis of there's always been a crisis of masculinity, hasn't there? When David Bowie started wearing dresses, and when men started wearing makeup in the 80s, there's always been a crisis of masculinity somewhere.
But what about the masculinity influencers? So they're under the radar, bringing out this rhetoric that is being listened to and heard, but it's going on under the radar of what parents are seeing as well.
Well, I think, yeah, that's one of the things that I think that that was a really powerful element of the Netflix series Adolescence, they thought the kid was safe in his bedroom. He's 13, that kind of idea that he was so young and wouldn't be doing this, wouldn't know about this kind of stuff. The amount of young people that, I mean, the average age that young people see porn now is 13. Algorithms spit out stuff. There's a brilliant piece by Mariana Spring, who's the kind of misinformation and social media correspondent for the BBC. She spoke to young men, and 75% of what young men see, they're not searching for, but the algorithms will spit out stuff. So I think the average is about 30 minutes, 23 minutes, I think, 22 minutes maybe, from when you set up a completely new social media account. If it's a boy that you've kind of set it up as a boy, it's about 20 minutes before they start to see something misogynistic. And once you click on that, the algorithms keep. So there's this kind of echo chamber of what men should be. And they, because of the way Tate and other people like Joe Rogan have manipulated the algorithms, and they've kind of taken to social media very quickly. And people like Russell Brand, who did it when Me Too started, he kind of shifted over there because I think he knew his reckoning was coming. They've kind of weaponized this kind of space and made it into a very masculine space. And there was a really good quote from a BBC report last year that said, it stains your brain. So this guy was saying, I was watching a dog on a skateboard, and then all of a sudden there was a bloke hitting a woman, and there was kind of people punching each other and big knives and cars and stuff. And he said, I don't search for that stuff. And once it's in there and you've seen it doesn't go away. So I think there is a kind of echo chamber effect. It won't affect all young men. But when you've got women in schools as teachers who are having boys refuse to be taught by them or not to listen to them, and they have to go and get the big bloke from PE to come in and kind of shut the boys down and to quieten them down and calm them down, I think we do have a massive problem. And I think the parents don't really have a clue what the kids are looking at. And when you look at, I think there was a report recently that said that 60% of men and 25% of women in the UK watch porn on a regular basis. So they're not going to want to restrict their Wi-Fi if they're watching porn at home. So, kids have been able to see it as well. Loads and loads of young people. By the age of 18, 79% of people have seen violent porn. So the normalization of sexual violence is massive in young people. A report last year from the Youth Endowment Fund found that of the people that were in relationships aged between 13 and 17, 49% of them had experienced violent or controlling behavior from their partners. And that again comes from the manosphere kind of ideas that you need to control her, you need to get her passwords, you need to stop her going out, she shouldn't have male friends because I care about you. And then, looking through phone messages, checking phones, threatening to release kind of sexualized images of that person that they might have got as a nude, image-based sexual abuse. So if 50% of young people in relationships are either experiencing violence, and it's quite depressing. But I think what's happened is also technology has normalized the ability to track and trace and control and monitor people. Whereas, years ago, people might have been married for 10 years and they suspect their partner's having an affair. They'd kind of get a private detective to go to the pub near their partner's work to take photos of them having lunch with somebody. I think young people are starting relationships going, I don't trust you because, men always have a side piece, not my word, or women can't be trusted. So we're going to use technology for you to prove to me that you're trustworthy. So coercive control is kind of baked in, I think, to young people's relationships. I speak to some year sevens about 6 months ago, and this girl said, location's normal. I said, what do you mean? She said, location's normal. What do you mean? What do you mean by normal? Oh, if you're going out with someone, it's normal to have location on. You should have it on. Why? So they know where you are. What? Do you kind of find yourself monitoring people? Oh, yeah. I need to know where they are. Why do you need to know? They might be cheating. They also might not. What's happening to the rest of your day when you're not with them and all you're doing is looking at your phone to see where they are? Isn't that exhausting? Imagine the cortisol levels of young people in relationships now. It's just stress because it's totally been normalized that they should track and follow and monitor each other. And all of those things are the on-ramp to coercive control and controlling behavior. all abusive relationships. So 76% of those of intimate partner, coercive control happens in intimate partners, which means 24% doesn't. So families, workplaces, friendship groups. That's where coercive control happens as well. Workplace bullying. I've been bullied by two different bosses in exactly the same way. Why I didn't see it the second time, I've no idea, but I didn't. And it's massive, and it's become easier with technology.
And that's the big challenge, isn't it? So, conscious of time, there's a couple of things that I want to ask you. I also want to say it really annoys me. I can't track my husband because when he disappears on his little home bargaino shops, and he disappears for all those hours, and I'm waiting for him to bring the shopping back, then I'm like, where are you? But he refuses to go down the Apple route. So he's like, no, I shall not be in your gang. Having said that, I do track both the children, and quite a few of my friends and their kids are like, oh my God, how can your mum still see where you are? And I was like, as long as I pay for the phone, I get to decide what I'll do with the phone. But that came from having
there's valid reasons as parents for us to know where our kids are.
Yeah. Maybe not 19 and 23.
Well, ours are 31 and 25, and we still know where they are, but that's mainly because they're on the way up, and we've forgotten to get something from the shop. We can go, you call into the co-op or booze to get something on the way here. That's the main reason.
Yeah, that's me as well, actually. So
let's get to the pub first.
See you there. Trying to pick me up.
Yeah.
So, very quickly, what out of the stuff that you've done and the conversations that you've had, the schools that you've talked in, and your general research, what are maybe the three things that we can do to encourage better conversations, whether it's with our peers, with our colleagues, with our friends, or with our kids?
Be more present. First of all, every one of us is distracted by technology. One of the things we used to do when the girls lived at home was we would have dinner without phones, no phones at the table. And what was the best part of your day? What was the worst part of your day? What could have been better? And there's your meal sorted. And you're also connecting. You're tapping into what they're saying and what they're not saying. So I think that's the first one. Have technology-free meals. Go for walks. I think one of the things that we're not very good at when we have kids, or people generally, is right, let's have a chat.
Yeah.
And sphincter goes, yeah.
Penny on last podcast, she described it as cat bumhole face.
Quite. But go for a walk. You're concentrating on something else, or just do some craft. Or Loyal Kana said he got to know his dad. He'd had a really fractious relationship with his birth father, but his dad offered to teach him to drive during lockdown. And he said after a while, I stopped talking and started listening. And I think that's, do a task with someone if you got to have a chat, make a meal, make some food, go for a walk, do stuff, and then listen. And again, you're present. If you're kneading bread or you're chopping vegetables or something, or you're, I don't know, doing a bit of gardening, you can't look at your phone. You can't be distracted, and so that adds to being present. And when you ask someone how they are, listen to what they say. That's my third thing. Oh, are you? Well, I'm fine. What do you mean? Well, my mum's not been well, but I'll be all right. Well, tell us about it. What's going on? That must be hard. Well, yeah, I wish I'd spend more time there. Well, why don't you? I've got work. And I said, work will always be there. Take some time off. Go and spend some time with your mum if you're worried. And just number one rule in it, be more present.
Yeah. And it's about being intentional about it. And you're so right. When you're doing something, you're like, and it wasn't even something conscious I did with the kids were growing up, but if I wanted to talk to them, we went for a drive, because there's something about you both facing forward, and it works with meetings. If you want to have a meeting with someone about something, go for a walk, because when you're both facing forwards and you get to look up, you've got a different cognitive brain space. So therefore you access different things, different thoughts, and it's more comfortable, even if you're having an uncomfortable conversation. And I think that we forget, because again, it's one of the many things that's been weaponized. We forget the power of nature, of being outside, and actually just going for a walk is one of the best things that we can do to sort our own thoughts out, but equally have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think also when you're next to each other, you're not kind of constantly judging for people's responses. Is that should I say that, or what are they? Oh, I didn't like the way they raised their eyebrow there. So then you kind of temper what you're about to say, and I think it's really important that we try and be as open, as honest as we can. And I'm saying that I couldn't even access my feelings earlier, so things take a while to get rid of. And sometimes I will go down that kind of everything's fine rabbit hole, and I think, well, actually I really need to talk about this because I'm not sleeping very well and that kind of stuff. So yeah, we're all work in progress, aren't we?
And that's the thing, isn't it? It's giving permission to ourselves to be a work in progress and to actually go, do you know what? Some days it's going to be a bit crap, but then, we're going to do something differently the next day, and we're going to keep having these conversations. And I think, one of the things that I would add to what you're saying is being open to it. The next time someone thinks that, myself included, that feminism is a dirty word, or misogyny is a dirty word, or patriarchy is a dirty word, it's not because I'm getting on the bloody bandwagon. It's because we need to be open to a conversation or curious about what it might mean.
Yeah, I think that patriarchy, old school masculinity, all of that stuff, it harms men as well as everybody else. So if we're completely honest about it, it doesn't do us any favors. And we've been kind of groomed to defend this thing that men in the past have created. And we have to just go, actually, do you know what? Maybe it's not doing me any favors, shutting my emotions up and wanting to fight everyone all the time. Maybe I'll just take a step back and think, well, which bits of this are okay and which bits are harming me and the people around me.
Yeah. So, Bernie, I ask all my guests, as you know, about their 6-word memoir, which might be a memoir, an affirmation, a mantra, comes from the fabulous shortest story ever told by Ernest Hemingway. So, what is your 6-word memoir?
I know men can be better.
Ooh, that's powerful.
Because there's a lot of me that gets very frustrated with the way men behave. And, I'm not saying not all men. What I am saying is that if we're not so wedded to traditional forms of masculinity that put us in what's called the man box, you probably heard of the man box before. Tony Porter did an absolutely brilliant TED talk on that, one of the most popular ever. If we weren't so wedded to defending things that harmed us, I think we'd enable ourselves to be better mentally, to be more present, to be less defensive, and to just be more supportive of other people instead of putting ourselves first, which is what we're taught to do.
Yeah.
Very much in terms of, and just to finish that off, Jamila Jamil said a really brilliant thing. She was on another podcast, which I'm not going to name, but she
name it. I'm all for sharing.
It was on the High Performance podcast.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely.
She was the scariest guest they've ever had. But she basically said, we need to teach people, particularly men and boys, how to accept rejection, because we are taught that we can have the world, we can have whatever we want. And she said her experience as working as an actor is that she doesn't get 95% of the jobs she goes for. She doesn't get 95% of the auditions, not because she's shit, but because she's not the right fit. And I think if we, particularly as men who have been known to kill women who say no to them, if we learn to accept that, okay, I'm not a good fit, we're not a good fit, okay, have a nice evening, have a good life, and move on, then I think we'd all be a lot better. We'd all be less defensive. And I think as men, we'd be a lot safer to ourselves and we'd be a lot safer to be around.
Bernie, thank you so much for disrupting my little echo chamber. I've absolutely loved it. I loved having you on and talking. It's going to be a long old podcast, so people need to get the listening ears on, as they would be saying. So
maybe between two halves. Far be it from me to tell you how to run your own podcast, but I am a bloke. Why don't I explain podcasting to you?
What is podcasting, Bernie? Please tell me.
Basically, where men shout into microphones. So I don't know why you think you're able to do it anyway.
And on that note, thank you for being on It's Got Pockets.
I've loved it.
It's been
so
lovely. As we button up another episode of It's Got Pockets, remember that just like that perfect dress with hidden storage, you've got pockets of potential. You can be exactly who you are meant to be with no one getting in your way, not even yourself. Just remember, you're not done yet. That plan B or plan C might be waiting for you. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to work with me, or simply want to connect, come and find me at sarahknightconsultancy.co.uk or on LinkedIn, you'll find me as Knighty S. See you next time.